as we get started with today's episode of Trackside, I want to show off the very first locomotives I've repainted since the last episode. Very quickly, I actually started repainting the Amtrak E8 shortly after they came out. It wasn't that hard to repaint these guys. They're actually not that hard at all. So the locomotives I've repainted were mainly the Phase 1 scheme of Amtrak, because these have the dual headlights as well as the portholes on the side. The railroads I've repainted were the Trackside National Railway, which I've actually showed off before. Cue up the image on what should I call it? Recap later. We have the Frisco E8s, the Chicago, Burlington, and Quincy E8s, all in Phase 1 schemes. Then over here for Phase 2, Amtrak Phase 2, which is very different from the Phase 1 locomotives. We have the Burlington Northern E8s. Now, interesting fact, the Burlington Northern E8 and the Chicago, Burlington, and Quincy E8 both share the same number 99, 39, and Chicago, Burlington, and Quincy has 9939A. Well, fun fact about that locomotive, and I'll describe it a little bit more in detail, but that locomotive is actually at the St. Louis Museum of Transportation here. So I'll talk about that a little bit more later. So these are the locomotives I've repainted first, however. However, there's also some other locomotives I've repainted as well, which are all the way over here. Along with the E8s, I've decided to try and fiddle around with re-lettering, that is, the various Bessemer and Lake Erie locomotives. So these are the original Bessemer and Lake Erie locomotives. These are the 060s, which actually are called six-wheeled coupled in the editor, but they're actually typically referred to as six-wheelers. They come with two different tenders. There's only one type of locomotive and two different types of tenders. There's the slope back tender, which is this one, and then there's the standard tender, which is this one here. Then there's the 210-2 Santa Fe locomotives, and they come with two different tenders, the lettered tender, the block letters, and then the railhead logo, which is what this is. Now, the Bessemer and Lake Erie locomotives were the perfect fit for the Trackside National Railway and their fleet of locomotives. So we have these six-wheeler 060s of the Trackside National Railway with the Trackside name on the side. The 210, they both have slope backs and the standard tenders. We have the Trackside National Railway's 210-2 Santa Fe's with the railhead logo replaced with the Trackside National Railway emblem and the Trackside National Railway block letters. Both of these also feature automatically renumbered locomotives. However, the six-wheelers did become slightly more difficult to re-letter and rename, because it turns out that the shape files are what you need to modify to get the names to show up. So I'll probably do another video later, but it turns out that these guys, you need to modify the shape files, and as a result, I kind of probably have to include the shape file to some extent for these locomotives to actually work, and I feel like not a lot of people are ever going to understand how to fix that. So, other than the Santa Fe locomotives, which don't need the shape file to be modified at all, I will be probably including the shape file on request if you want these guys to run on your own railroad. Which, by the way, I probably don't think I'm going to get any requests to get these locomotives active. So let's get some details on these locomotives a little bit more, individually speaking. So the first locomotives we'll take a look at is the Trackside National Railway's E8 locomotives, because that's the bulk of my repaints right now. The main paint scheme is based off the PennZ, the Pennsylvania Railroad's paint scheme, in the swooping form down here. So it swoops up and goes into a straight line down the portholes, all the way down the B units. And both locomotives, they're all numbered from 1000 to 1000B, 1000 to 1005 to 1000B to 1005B. Each locomotive has the Trackside National painted on the side. All the locomotives are pretty much close to the original design. or rather, like a little bit more detailed than the others. So the swoosh design, like I said, was modeled after the Penzi. The top part here was modeled after the Union Pacific, and there was a slight problem when I noticed this in-game, but it turns out the little arrow here, featured on the top part, it's off-center just a bit. The middle of the cap is right about here, but I ended up mixing this up slightly, and the middle here doesn't match up, so I'll have to fix that in-game, but I can do it. It's not too bad. Because thankfully I saved the actual designs, the overlays and everything, so I can get back in there and fix it, so not too bad. The B unit's roof is not painted at all, so there's not very much, there's not anything that's changed significantly there. The back ends are relatively the same. The caps and everything, they're all fixed. The underframes are painted in a silver white color, like I mentioned before. On the original E8s, I was going to do that and repaint the trucks into a more typical white silver scheme. And I did that with these guys, but I had to do some fiddling around with the files. For example, the Frisco E8s here have the same truck textures, but this was the first time I had actually done it. And as a result, these guys were really, really complicated to mess around with the trucks and everything. So I'll get to explain to that in a minute. The ladders on the locomotives and everything have been repainted to a silver color. The locomotives, again, feature all original paint and everything. The front end here, the lights, you can barely see it, but the lights are not repainted at all. Not too much anyway. The light has been changed from a red to a blackish scheme, I think, that one. And this one's just black again. So we got those guys. Now, like I said, each locomotive is individually renumbered. They're all fixed numbered. So these are numbered 1000 to 1005, and the B units are numbered 1000B to 1505B. So there's a total of 6 drivered locomotives, 6 non-drivered locomotives, and 6 B units. So that's 18 locomotives you got right there. The next locomotive you got here is the Frisco E8s. All racehorses are included from 2006 to 2022. And the locomotive I have here is number 2016. Interestingly enough, 2016 is ironically the very first locomotive. The reason I placed number 2016 here because she was the first, well, not first. The first ever time I played Railworks was when Railworks 2016 came out, so kind of did some significance there. Now the striping down here is slightly modified from the real locomotive. I think there's like 5 stripes altogether on the front end, but I had to modify it because the actual striping didn't match up with the actual locomotive. So I've added a few stripes, I think, so there's a total of 6 and there should be 5. The front end has the curve like on the original Friscos. The logos actually had to be repainted from another logo I had. I had the original red logo, but I repainted it to the black logo to match up with the original locomotive. The lettering on the side is actually the original Frisco font. Fun fact, I actually had the Frisco font for a long time, specifically to do repaints, and I just so happened to use it. Now, I'm sure you've actually seen the Frisco font before on some of my title cards, too. Some of my early title cards for Railworks Sundays used the same font as the Frisco locomotives here, and this actually showed up quite well. Fun fact, and Tristain National Railway logo here is actually written in the Pennsylvania Station font, the Penn State font. And the Bessemer and Lake Erie font, and I think it's Impact font is used for the Tristain National Railway here on this. That's actually the Union Pacific GP30 logo that I've used here to simply replace it on that position, in the position there. The Frisco Railroad's numbers have been, the Frisco font has been used for the numbers here, along with the Penn State letter for the B unit. And both the Frisco E8 and the Tristain and the Tristain National Railway E8 use a similar number fonts for the 2 locomotives. They're slightly altered, but they're pretty close to the originals. Now, another thing I want to point out is that the EMD's builder's plate is found on the locomotive files. You can actually find it in there and everything. The problem is there's nothing written on here on any of the locomotives, and I want to actually go ahead and go in there and edit the lettering, the proper lettering for the EMD locomotives on all my locomotives, as well as for some locomotives, such as the Trackside National Railway locomotives, add the E8 logos under the cab, much like the Chicago, Burlington, and Quincy. The Chicago, Burlington, and Quincy E8 locomotives do share an interesting history in that these locomotives, or this locomotive in particular, still around. Interestingly enough, this old girl is actually in my hometown of St. Louis, Missouri currently, at the St. Louis Museum of Transportation. She is sitting nice and pretty, restored back to her Chicago, Burlington, and Quincy paint at the National Museum of Transportation in St. Louis. However, she is not in her Phase 1 sort of porthole design. She actually was originally designed, she originally was built like this when the museum got her. In fact, she did not have her porthole in the middle, much like this E8. And on the picture you're seeing right now, she actually was just recently given a modified porthole for the Mars light, which is down here at the bottom. So she now has her original configuration. The only thing that they need to do now would be to add the portholes on the side, and she would be back to her original E8 livery, or the original E8. And yes, the E8 design, the paint scheme is very much like the one that I saw at the museum back in 2016 when they just finished restoration work on her. Another interesting fact about the Chicago, Burlington, and Quincy is that they were, in 1980, shortly after they merged with the Northern Pacific Railroad and a few other railroads to form the Burlington Northern. In May of 1980, the Burlington Northern Railroad merged with the Frisco Railroad and added much of the Frisco Railroad's roster into their locomotive, much of their Frisco Railroad roster into theirs. However, by that time, all the Frisco E8s were under Amtrak's designations, Amtrak, which by then they were already scrapped for the most part, because by 1980, Amtrak was already using the F40PH, which I'll probably probably repaint another time. But the Frisco E8s do share an interesting tie with the Chicago, Burlington, and Quincy E8s. Now, the Chicago, Burlington, and Quincy E8s are a gray color, and the one that you saw in the picture is a silver color, and I could have just gone in and just painted it white, the truck's white and everything. And actually, if you notice, the trucks are painted black. They're still the black coloring as they are in the Amtrak E8s, and that's because the Chicago, Burlington, and Quincy E8 and the Burlington Northern E8 are in the same folder. They're using the same shape files and everything for the trucks and everything. The only thing that's different between them is the body, the top part, the Phase 2 body of the locomotives, and as a result, I could not repaint the trucks or the roof, for that matter, on these locomotives because they shared the same parts. And if I repainted the roof or the trucks, it would show up on the Phase 2 version of the locomotive, which was the Burlington Northern locomotive. Also, the Chicago, Burlington, and Quincy locomotive is the only locomotive so far that features the E8 logo, which I had to remake myself because I couldn't find one online. But I have to say I did a decent job of it. So the Chicago, Burlington, and Quincy, and the Burlington Northern, like I said, share the same logo and share the same folder and everything. But one thing I didn't tell you guys right now, is that when the museum did have this locomotive, originally they got it in the MARC, the Manhattan Transit Authority, like the commuter system, the MARC transportation system scheme. They got it from New York, essentially. So number 9939 had seen quite the life. She was originally assigned to trains such as the California Zephyr, then moved to commuter service for Metra, then served under the Burlington Northern Railroad as part of their commuter service, as well as probably a partial run with the Empire Builder, due to the fact that the Burlington Northern did serve the Empire Builder for a good few months under the Burlington Northern scheme. And yes, that was a thing. The Burlington Northern did serve passenger service because the Burlington Northern was formed in 1971, well, actually 1970, and a year later, Amtrak was formed. So essentially, Burlington Northern passenger trains were seen on the rails for a short time. There's very few photos of these locomotives, but there is a handful of photos of the Burlington Northern passenger equipment, which I'll probably get to repaint soon because, let's face it, we need some Burlington Northern passenger equipment. Anyway, so number 9939 was sent to the Burlington Northern. Eventually, the Burlington Northern removed the E8s from their roster, sending them to various other commuter service lines, some of which went to the Metro line, which they served quite heavily under, and some went under the Manhattan line with Mark. And this is one of the locomotives that was in Mark's service. Interestingly enough, the Mark trains, this locomotive was saved by the Museum of Transportation, brought to the museum in its Mark design, which I'll probably have to repaint as well. I'm not sure what number it was under, but I'll go ahead and do that. Number 9939, number 9939 here is rather interesting because she's actually quite heavily built. So for one, most of the Burlington Northern E8s did have a black nose up here to some extent. They had a black sort of roof here, but some of them had green roofs. Depending on what the locomotive was servicing under, but I think most of them, by the time they were servicing Metra, pretty much looked like this. The front end does have some slight issues in that the front end needs to be painted a little bit to match up with the front end here. You can clearly see that the color for the roof and the cab is slightly off. The striping here is the BN Tiger stripes. So I had to do that for the Burlington Northern's E8s because these were very common for their services. It's pretty much on par with the original design. The locomotive number and letters are actually Arial font, which is on every computer in the every Windows computer. It's Arial font. I've used it so much for writing my fanfics, which I'll probably talk about later on in another video. But it turns out the Burlington Northern also used that same font for their railroad as well. So this is the Burlington Northern's railroad font. The BN logo is the same logo that you see. Is actually their logo. I just ripped it off of one of the websites. And interestingly enough, the font colors were inverted. So the top part here was actually, the B part here was green, and the N was white. So I just swapped the colors around and there we go. Now, shortly after I showed this off on one of my Facebook groups, I got notified that another person is repainting the Amtrak E8s to the Burlington Northern E8s, and I was kind of disheartened by that. I was like, well, rip that. I was going to number quite a few of them to use on Metro trains for the Chicago racetrack route at one point, but I will see how he works his out and see if I can complement his with mine. Because from his design, he actually has it much more heavily weathered than mine. And from the picture he showed off, which I won't show because I haven't asked him really, he does have it still using the Amtrak numbering system, but he says he will be releasing it eventually. So we'll see about that. And yes, I have not repainted the bolts to some extent. All the bolts share the white color, so very interesting enough there. Moving on to the steam fleets, we have, like I mentioned before, the Bessemer Lake Erie's EA, the 060s and 210-2s here. But the Tristan National Railway locomotives are not too heavily modified. The only thing that has been changed is the lettering on the tenders, as well as a few interesting little notifications on the cabs, which show the TNR on the front end of these locomotives. Now, the only significant difference on these locomotives is the railhead logo on these set of tenders. So there's not much change on these locomotives, so there's not much I need to do. But like I said before, the shape file had to be modified for the six-wheelers. And yeah, that's rather unfortunate. So at some point I will probably go a little further with these locomotives, making some more modifications. They do have some auto renumbers. They do auto renumber, and there's actually plans for more numbers than just up to 315. I plan to have them go up all the way to 415, so that's a total of over 100 locomotives I got here, because the first locomotive here is the 300. Also, interestingly enough, six-wheelers go from 110 to 120. And if you remember, the SW1500 locomotive that I made, the Titan, was numbered 101. Well, in the story of the Trackside National Railway, there was 6 locomotives, number 100 to 105, with number 101 being the only one that was named. Well, all switcher number locomotives were kept in the 100 scheme. So when the Trackside National Railway came up with received delivery of the 060s, instead of changing the numbers from 100 to 119, they were reading off the 100 to 110. They were numbered from 110 to 120. And I did plan to have 110 to 125, but so far I haven't done that just yet. So these old girls are going to see a few more modifications in the future. I may even add a whistle or two to the locomotive, to each locomotive. So let's go take a look at some freight cars now. Alright, so the first set of cars I want to show off are the cabooses from the Bessemer and Lake Erie Railroad. And yes, 90% of the cars I ended up repainting were basically letters of the Bessemer and Lake Erie cars. There's like a handful of changes to these guys. The only cars I really repainted was the passenger equipment on the Bessemer and Lake Erie, so we'll get to that in a minute. Oh, that's interesting. This is 1776, huh? Interesting. Should get a rainbow, red, white, and blue skin for you guys. So these are the Bessemer and Lake Erie cars, the cabooses. This is the block letter car. This is the railhead logo car. Both cars feature a few changes, a few key things, such as the safety first, the numbers, and the font. Not much is different from any other caboose on the set. The Trackside National Railway cars feature a similar design. The Trackside National Railway is featured on the top, Trackside. The railhead logo version features the actual emblem on the front. The cars are not changed from their original numbers, so they share the same numbers as the Bessemer and Lake Erie font. A little less work for me, honestly. And yeah, they're just simply changed from BLE to TNR, and simply just from there. Yeah, that was the only thing I changed on those guys. Well, however, these guys were much more difficult. These are all of the freight cars I've repainted or re-lettered so far. One is the Bessemer and Lake Erie version. The other is the Trackside National Railway version. And my God, were they a pain! So unlike the cabooses back there, the Bessemer and Lake Erie cars, oh my God, these are still some of the more difficult ones I've had to mess around with. So first off, you can see that the Bessemer and Lake Erie hoppers are designed as such, so the lettering doesn't mess with the rivet here. Well, try telling that to me when I'm trying to design my own Trackside National Railway car. The actual TNR on the car is cut off. The N is cut right down the middle, and I can't figure out a way to put it in properly. Another thing to note is that on the Bessemer and Lake Erie cars, the so-called safety appliances and everything, it said United States Safety Appliances Standard, And there's actually other places on the car that will mention this as well. On the top of the car, you see the BLE on there. On here, you see the TNR. Now, the safety standards that are mentioned here, they're actually changed just slightly on the Tristain cars to say Tristain Safety Appliances Standard. Interestingly enough, I wanted to say Kingdom of Tristain Safety Appliances Standard. But I didn't do that, honestly, because it wouldn't have fit with the same size font. So, is that? Okay. So yeah, all the cars are labeled as such. The cars are actually renamed heavily, too. They do not share the same names as the BLE cars to make things a little easier for people to look around for. Because the BLE cars, you have to, they're all in the same group, which means that the loaded cars and the unloaded cars literally are right next to each other and are pretty hard to mess around with. However, I've modified each of these cars to say modern, old, modern and weathered, and old and weathered. Now, the old refers to as the old lettering. Basically, this would be the old lettering on all the cars for the Tristain National Railway. It would say Tristain National rather than just Tristain. The Tristain cars are referred to as modern because this would be a more common font for most railroads to use just the first set of names rather than the actual Tristain National Railway or say TNR or something like that. In fact, Union Pacific still, I think, is the only one that is like, for example, the Norfolk Southern would say Norfolk Southern Railroad or Norfolk Southern Corp on the side of the cars. Southern, like, I try and figure out how to say this. Anyway, essentially this would be, the way it's lettered is much older. And much more, less minimal, I guess you could say. So the modern cars do share a similar design as the Bessemer and Lake Erie font, which is why I also kind of consider them modern. All of the cars have been renamed and relettered. However, you've noticed that there are only 4 of each car, while all the way back here, the ore cars have 2 more cars added to them, the brown scheme. Now, we'll get into this in a second, but all the cars do share, or all the cars except for the ore cars are named Hopper. They actually say 55-ton Hopper. And actually, the coal cars actually don't say, like, coal hopper, they just say hopper. The other cars, like the limestone cars here, say limestone hopper, gravel hopper, sand hopper, and each of them share the same name. And each of them kind of show, like, weathered, modern, that kind of thing. However, the ore cars are renamed, instead of ore hopper, they are renamed ore jennies. I've actually gotten fond of calling the ore cars ore jennies because that's actually a common railroad, that's actually a railroad term I've heard before for ore cars. They've been called ore jennies because many of the smaller ore cars were fairly small and, like, you could have a ton of them. Fun fact, the Burlington Northern ore cars that I've repainted before, I've showed those off on the previous video as well. They were actually renamed ore jennies, and those were the kind of cars that were typically referred to as ore jennies. However, these cars were still referred to as hoppers, and these are actually one of the few cars that only has a half load. I have no idea why the ore cars are given half loads. Maybe somebody in the comments can explain to me why that is, but these cars are always half filled. I've kind of gotten annoyed by that. I may actually go in and modify some values and give it a full ore car load. If, well, if I take a picture here, I'm going to show it off here. I have no idea. Never mind. So, yeah, and all like the original Tristain National Railway cars, they all say Tristain Safety Appliances Standard, Tristain National Railway, modern cars. Now, these cars are actually referred to as ore jennies just plainly. Modern and ore jenny weathered. They don't say old or weather modern, because basically these are this is the, when you think of an ore jenny, you think of the gray or the brown color on every train. So, don't know. Now, the other cars I've repainted were the box cars here. So these are the Bessemer and Lake Erie box cars, or wooden box car, 40-foot wooden box cars. And they've actually got distinguished by the loaded and unloaded version. The loaded version has the LD lettering at the tail end of the train car, and the unloaded has MT. Well, the Tristan National Railway box cars feature a similar design where I've left it pretty much the same. I think I've only modified them slightly, just saying one's loaded, one's not, by just removing the MT on it and adding the term loaded to it. But yeah, they should have the same weight values and everything. The only thing I changed, the logos on the cars were slightly harder to design because these cars actually had font and everything. I wanted to go in there and add the like a rail scheme, like a lettering on the side or something, to kind of show off what they were designed after, kind of like modern cars. But a lot of wooden box cars didn't really have like advertisements on the side, so I didn't bother with it. And the Bessemer Lake Erie Railroad did. The Bessemer Lake Erie route does come with a handful of box cars, quite a few box cars actually, much like the coal cars here. But I didn't repaint and re-letter all of them. You only get one set of box cars, and thankfully they're all renumbered, so you can actually place quite a few of them and not get bored. And the other box cars don't have any lettering on them in the first place, so you can use those anyway. Now the next set of cars are the flat cars. You've got ties, you've got rails, you've got spools of cable, you got pipes, you've got tarp loads, you've got trucks. Hell, you've even got a frickin' crane. I wasn't even aware this was in the Bessemer Lake Erie route until I ran into it in the route building set. But yeah, there's a frickin' crane. So like maintenance way equipment there. So I had to put it in there. Now the Bessemer Lake Erie route does have them all named and lettered and everything. The United States Safety Appliances Standard. Each of them come with a loaded and unloaded version. So the only thing I had to change was the Tristan logo on all the cars. Well, lo and behold, I found out that the way how they're written, how the Bessemer Lake Erie font goes, is not as close as you might think. So I actually had to type each letter individually and compress it in the editor, which made things a little complicated. So some of the letters are slightly off-centered and whatnot. They're slightly muddled and whatnot. It even looks like from this angle you can actually see that the I is slightly lower than every other letter in the set. But it gives it a bit of an interesting feel to it. One thing to note is that these cars here, I think, are the only ones that share the original Tristan's lettering system, other than these guys. So you can actually get a good look at how these are designed. So this is the original, so this is the modified version, and this is the regular version. Now there is another set that says maintenance of way somewhere on the cars, but I don't see it anywhere on these cars. So I'm wondering if there's something somewhere that shows the term maintenance of way. Oh, you know what? I know where it's at. Well, I thought I did. Never mind. So anyway, you got all these. Now, each of the cars are also renamed heavily in the editor. They do not say, like, black, blah, 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 and then have to load in, like, say, load ties, load rails. They're just simply said, they're simply just got the parentheses, and they've changed, the names changed around. I'll show that in the editor later on. But one thing I really want to talk about is these guys down here. The trucks. Now in the editor, these are referred to as trucks. However, due to the Tristan's lore, I actually renamed them carriages. Because in Tristan, the advent of the automobile hasn't been done, because the entire world's in the medieval era. I mean, case in point, have you seen some of the openings to the anime? They're based off of the idea of a truck like this would be considered more of a carriage, and up until modern era starts coming into play, they would be considered carriages. So in the editor, they're called carriages, and hopefully you guys won't get too confused by that. Now, with that said, I did really want to repaint the crane here. I really wanted to change the way it looked to look a little bit more reminiscent of a more sort of maintenance of way equipment. This just looks like I mean, seriously, it doesn't look right. I'm going to take a screenshot of it, though. I mean, it doesn't look too much like the actual, like, maintenance of way equipment, but it doesn't look like a wreck crane or anything. It looks like something that you'd use, like hastily building something. You'd hastily built in your backyard or something. Alright, so with that done, let's go ahead and talk about some of the passenger equipment now. Alright, so what you're seeing in front of you now is a lot of heavyweights. Yeah, a lot of them. These are the Bessemer and Lake Erie heavyweights that came with the roof. There are 3 heavyweight, 3 different numbers of the heavyweight baggage car, and then 5 numbers of the heavyweight, damn it, I can't think of it. Oh wait, heavyweight coach, the Pullmans, that's it. Well, I got each number here on written down and everything. However, the Tri-State National Railway doesn't abide by those rules, essentially. The Tri-State National Railway has 2 different folders situated for the Tri-State National Railway. The first one says Tri-State, using the Bessemer and Lake Erie font, spaced out just like the similar design of the Bessemer and Lake Erie. There's no numbers on the side of the cars because they don't use the same number set. They don't use these numbers. They use a similar number to the extra cars that are seen in the folder. Apparently, G-Trax gave a whole bunch of Pullman cars you could mess around with, heavyweight cars. Another thing to note is that the Tri-State National Railway coaches in the Pullman green scheme do not say coach, they say Tri-State Pullman car, because this would be essentially a Pullman built car. The only car that is significantly changed, and the Tri-State National Railway also has the baggage car here. I did actually go into the editor and significantly change some of the lettering on that part of the car. And instead of Railway Express, there's actually another set of lettering that would refer to the RPO car, which I'm assuming they had one in place at one point. So the RPO car would be in there at some point. And instead of United States Railway Post Office Service, it said, I renamed it to Royal, I think it said Royal Tristanian Post Office? I don't know. But something similar to the Royal Mail Service. Now the other set of cars here, as you can see, they're slightly messed up, but hey, are the Tristranian. Once again, my friend William's train is gotten an upgrade, much like the E8s. The logo now shows a proper Tristranian logo, much better than it did before. The painted cars show orange striping way down the middle of the car. Yes, there's some slight clipping into the cars. The paint scheme doesn't work very well, honestly. And the Tristranian also has a few coaches. The only thing that's messed up on these cars is that the rivets here are actually hiding. The rivets are a separate texture altogether. And as a result, the rivets are actually overlapping the orange line that you see on the car. Now, interestingly enough, the paint here, the logo and everything, these are actually from the original Bessemer and Lake Erie cars, which is why I've only had these guys set out. However, the paint scheme, I actually use a different texture file on these cars. There's actually 2 different texture files. There's the Bessemer and Lake Erie texture file, which is labeled as BLE. However, there's another file that's labeled BO Blue, which means Baltimore and Ohio. They had Baltimore and Ohio cars in there for use on for G-Trax. Now I'm wondering if all these cars were, because these cars were also seen on the Kingswood branch, released by the same guys who did the Springfield and New Haven route. So, interestingly enough, all these cars are pretty much the same altogether. Now, supposedly there's also a file that references the passenger view on some of the cars, interior-wise. However, I have not seen an interior passenger view for any of these cars. But yeah, that's interesting. Again, the texture files were slightly messed up to some extent when porting them over, but I kept the texture files, the DDS files, because they're not too hard to repaint or anything, so if I do come across some problems, I can actually repaint it slightly. And unlike the 060s, I didn't actually have to go into the editor and modify the shape files to get this to work. Thankfully, anyway. Alright, guys, so before we get started with the next, talking about the next repaint, I want to mention that this little segment has been in the works, literally, since the last repaint workshop showcase. So all these lines I voiced were actually during the original script for all the other locomotives for the True State National Railway. And as such, all of this footage is extended footage, I guess you could say. And after that, we go straight into talking about the repaints. So I hope you enjoy this next segment. And yeah.
In early 2015, a series of private cars were commissioned by an unknown entity. This House on Rails was the first of its kind to be built, and is one of the few trains to be used as a mobile HQ. The cars were built for what seemed to be a normal high school club, the SOS Brigade, and are still under the ownership of the brigade's founding member, Haruhi Ito. The 5-car set is comprised of a power car, number 501, a bed and bath car, number 502, a so-called master sleeper car, number 503, a kitchen and dining car, number 504, and what has been called the living car, number 505. These cars make up the entire consist and are some of the most unusual pieces of rolling stock you'll ever come across.
Okay, so ignore the echo there for a second. I got this bastard just sitting here waiting for our chance to show off our very next repaint here. That was interesting. I guess if I just... Aha! Okay, so ignore the echo there. So the next repaint centers around the California Zephyr cars. So if you notice that these cars are lined up in a particular fashion. We have the observation dome car here. We have the diner. We have the dome lounge. Which, by the way, I don't know why this is occurring, but there's a particular lighting glitch for the lights here. One's up there, one's over there, which shouldn't be the right position. Anyway, we have a, I think it's the roomette sleeper or something like that. And then we have the baggage car. Each of these cars, whoops. Oh, I put the wrong one down. Whoops, that's the Western Pacific one. Anyway, that should be the Denver Rio Grande one, so all the cars are Denver Rio Grande cars. Each car does have the name of the railroad on the corner here, the name down here, and so like something there, and then the Denver Rio Grande logo would be here. But essentially, all the cars are relatively the same. Well, lo and behold, we do have another set of cars that, like I said in the intro there, like I said in the intro, was specifically and privately designed. These are the SOS Brigade's private train, the Brigade train. Each car is named as such. Hyon, the observation car. Mikuru, the dining car. Haruhi, the dome car. Koizumi, the sleeping car here. And Yuki for the power car. This is actually classified as the power car here. Go here. So what I'm doing here is I'm moving these cars out of the yard here for a second. But to kind of get a better look. But each of these cars is particularly designed, and like in the video I detail a lot about these cars, so I'm not going to go over these again. But each of these cars are specifically designed and modeled as such. So the only thing that's significantly different about these cars is that they come with this red stripe right down the middle. So there's the red stripe down the middle, and where the Denver Rio Grande logo should be, a lettering of ZOZ is situated on the car. And each car is named as such, like I mentioned before. The names are up on screen: Hyon, Mikuru, Haruhi, Koizumi, and Yuki. So yeah, I'm moving these cars over to where the other passenger equipment is for these cars. So there we go. So you may be asking yourself, why am I moving these cars out here? Well, lo and behold, I got a plan for the end of the video here. So, if you haven't noticed, we have a ton of spray painted equipment out here in this game in particular. And we have a handful of locomotives ready and willing to pull these cars. So what better way to end the video than to pull all these cars all at once? But before we do that, I'm going to go ahead and pull these cars over here, stop the train, and essentially go into a little bit more detail into what these cars, how these cars are made, how these cars are designed, and what they're supposed to be modeled after. With the brakes. There we go. Okay, so let's go into a little bit more detail with these cars. So Yuki here is the power car. Now, if you don't know what that is, these are basically the generator cars on most excursion consists. The Union Pacific and Norfolk Southern use these especially for the excursion power when the train is stationary. Now, on most mainline passenger trains back in the 1930s, 40s, and 50s, when electric-powered passenger cars were in use, many of them would have a generator situated, like tied to one of the wheels on the bottom of the car, where it would power the car only when it's moving. The only other way the car would get power would be from the locomotive. And very rarely, especially when these locomotives were powered by steam locomotives early on, that was not possible. They were steam heated too. So the steam locomotive would have a separate pipe going from the tender, from the locomotive through the tender to the locomotive to steam heat the cars. Well, when Amtrak took over a lot of the equipment, about 90% of the equipment was still steam heated, so a lot of their early locomotives had to be steam heated, to have steam boilers on them to steam heat the cars. And if we go back to the Amtrak locomotives, you'll see that this little spot here, this is actually where the boiler for the steam generator is situated. This is where the steam heating would come from on all of the E8 locomotives, and especially on steam locomotives, it would be from the boiler itself. Now, other locomotives, Amtrak even did this too, they would build special rail cars called steam generators to power and heat the cars when they were stationary, because it would put more effort on the locomotive to power and steam heat the cars by just from the locomotive. Eventually, Amtrak took delivery of what was called head-end power, or HEP, which would power the train when the train was stationary and not put much strain on the engine. Well, for railroads like the Union Pacific and Norfolk Southern, which don't have locomotives with head-end power, they would have specific train cars dedicated to this. Now, these cars would have a distinct humming sound and a distinct grill right over here. And these cars would essentially power the entire train while the train was stationary. They would have diesel generators inside the car. They would have power cables going from car to car, and each of the cars would be powered while stationary, and this would even supply air to the train just in case. So the power car here is basically your standard power car. Now, another thing to note is the red stripe right down the middle here. And this red stripe was actually almost a kind of test to some extent for the California Zephyr cars, because there's actually another rail car I will be probably making for the Frisco E8s. The Frisco E8s need some passenger equipment too, and to do what I want to do is I'm going to be repainting both the roof and the side panels here, and they will be featuring the Frisco Railroad's signature red on the top and bottom. So like here would be red, red, and red for the Frisco. Now this was basically a test to see if these cars would paint very well, and it does seem to work out very nicely. However, there's a slight problem with the roof in that there's minor details for the ribbing that interferes with the red paint. So I can't really do that on the top end. However, the Frisco Railroad passenger cars, like you see on screen here, are, and yes, that picture was taken in 1990, not 1940, so yes, that's 1990s era picture. So the cars here are basically sort of a test for the Frisco Railroad. The car's name, Yuki, is named after Yuki Nagato from The Melancholy of Haruhi Suzumiya. And the reason it's part of the generator car is that in the story there's actually a server room at the tail end of the car as well to provide various, like, it does nerve center kind of thing in case of emergencies. So, and Yuki in the show, in the anime and manga, is very much like a supercomputer kind of person. She's a data life form. I won't get into too many details about that. The next car, Koizumi, is classified as a bed and bath car. Now, in the description of the video, it said that the car was extended by a couple feet and had three-axle trucks rather than the current trucks it has currently. Now, other than modifying the actual file to extend it, I didn't do that. The only thing I really did was just paint the car and rename the car. So, like the Yuki, it comes with ZOZ on the sides and the name Koizumi. Now, the number is officially number 31130, which is the number that sees on all the screen. All these cars are almost fixed numbered, but they will auto renumber occasionally, but as part of the auto renumbering system. So there's no actual like fixed number. It's auto renumbered, but in game. So yeah, the car is basically in game. Like I described it in the show, in the little snippet beforehand. So yes, there's a lot to it. Not much has changed. Same red stripe right down the middle, lettering and everything. Haruhi is the sort of master bedroom car. I use the dome lounge car in particular for this car because I felt like it gave me more like room to like mess around with it just a little bit. The top part of the dome was supposed to be transformed into a master bedroom, and because there's no actual like passenger view up there, I didn't really have to worry about that. So the car also comes with the same lettering the name. Now Koizumi is named after the character Koizumi Itsuki, who is an Esper, E-S-P-E-R, that's how it's spelled, Esper. And yes, ESP is how it's pronounced in Japan. Like that's the psychic ability. So espers are psychics in the United States, but it's named Esper in Japan. Anyway, fun fact there. Haruhi is the name of the main character of the Melancholy of Haruhi Suzumiya. She's the brigade leader, and this car represents her status because it's the master bedroom car. And like I mentioned before, there's very little changed on the paint, a few details here and there, and whatnot. Oh, I'm getting cold here. So there's that. The next car, Mikuru, is the dining and kitchen car. So the whole back end here, about this far into the car, would be the kitchen car, and like a full-on dining room like you would see in a house would be the back end here. Interestingly enough, when I repainted the car, I actually intended to repaint the door as well with the red stripe. And this goes for all the other cars that actually have the doors on them. But when I saw the car in game, I actually saw that the door actually looked very nice without the paint on it. So I decided to leave it alone, and that's how you got the car's design here. The car is like it's not really changed too much, and yeah, various small details to it. The name is more centered than the other two cars. You can see on Haruhi's car, the name is off-centered just a little bit, and Koizumi's name is in a similar situation. Yuki's name, like Mikuru, is a little more centered, but not as much. She's the only dining car in the set, and one of the few that doesn't really change too much in the story. The last car, Kyon, is actually named after the character that really tells the story of the Melancholy of Haruhi Suzumiya, Kyon. He's never given a full name in the anime, manga, in the anime and the manga, so I simply named the car Kyon. And even there's a little joke at this in my fanfic that these cars are just based off of, where the character basically says, I should just go ahead and change my name to Kyon, as that's all you ever call me. Now that chapter hasn't been written yet, but still. The cars also share the same DOZ naming, and these are the only cars that actually have a passenger view. If you go into this view, there's a passenger view to the actual car. Now, in the story, it's described as a living car. Essentially a living room on rails, so there's that. Now, with this all said and done, all these cars are, of course, now, there's not much I've changed value-wise, but I do, in the future, intend to change some of the weight values for the Kyon, the Haruhi, and the Koizumi. These cars are actually going to be increased in weight. So the Koizumi, Haruhi, and Kyon are all going to be increased in weight to match that of the design that I set up in the fanfic. Another interesting side fact in the fanfic that I don't describe in the video is that the cars were kind of hinted to be built in the fanfic by a outside power, like outside the story of the Melancholy of Haruhi Suzumiya. And they were donated as sort of donate and give it to them not for the brigade, but for one of the other members that is featured in the story quite heavily, Andrew H. White, who actually makes minor appearances in other fanfics as well. And actually, interestingly enough, Andrew H. White is actually one of the characters that is featured in the fanfic that features the Tristranian and the Tristranian National Railway. So, yeah, there you go. So, with that said, I'm going to go ahead and end this particular segment. And when I get back, I'm going to have a train set up for us to run these all these cars on a route.